Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Jackson Peos back on the show. I was just looking, and this is Jackson's fifth time on the show, third solo episode. He's been on for 2 roundtables, the first episode was episode 158, and that was 2019, and we were basically talking about what we're going to be talking about today, but everything's going to be updated because Jackson's been working his ass off on this new study that's come out. And I imagine a lot of the audience have seen it. I'm actually this is how quick the evidence-based community are on just like dispersing information and getting like very well-written infographics out about studies, which has been really cool to see. So this is actually going to be episode 250 now. So almost 100 episodes since the first one that we've had together. But the study was named Continuous versus Intermittent Dieting for Fat Loss and Fat-Free Mass Retention in Resistance-Trained Adults, the ICECAP trial, which is, I like the acronym, very easy to remember. And so essentially looking at diet breaks. And this is a really cool study, I think, because it's actually done in a population that we really care about. Leaner individuals, resistance-trained individuals, not kind of the obesity individual, which all the other kind of intermittent dieting approaches have been. So I know you had a hypothesis and you obviously went in to kind of prove that right or wrong, and you had your kind of protocols, Jackson. I don't know if you want to run through the listeners kind of what you did, what you found, and then we can dig into some of the meat.
Yeah, it's funny you made that comment about how quickly the evidence-based community jumps on these studies. Menno actually had a write-up of the paper on his site before I'd even received the email from the journal saying, congratulations, your paper had been published ahead of print.
That's mad.
So like I had people saying, oh, cool, I saw your paper on Menno's website. I'm like, what paper? Like, it's crazy. But anyway, it's a good thing. So I'm not mad about it at all. Now, you are correct. So in 2019, I wrote a review paper in collaboration with some of the big dogs like Lane Norton, Eric Helms, and Andy Galpin, and it was titled Intermittent Dieting Theoretical Considerations for the Athlete. And basically, we hypothesized some of the benefits that intermittent dieting, i.e. dieting protocols that utilize refeeds and diet breaks, might have to weight-trained athletes. And we used the limited but reasonable body of research to support our cases that we made there. Now, we thought that at the time, we thought there was decent, at least, theoretical and mechanistic data to suggest that using either one or the other or both, refeeds and diet breaks, could potentially enhance the retention of metabolic rate during dieting and weight loss periods, enhance the retention of fat-free mass, i.e. muscle, and encourage or improve fat loss efficiency. Another side hypothesis that we had based on some of the acute overfeeding data with carbohydrates, we hypothesized that the intermittent boost in carbohydrate intake delivered from a refeed or diet break could trigger an upsurge in leptin circulations in the blood that could have a flow-on effect to what we consider a metabolic boosting effect, as well as a appetite suppressing effect. So we had a whole host of ideas in our head based on sort of pulling little bits of data from here and there. And I'll be honest, I was very confident that we were going to see these expectations get verified when running a randomized controlled trial in weight trained athletes. Now, for the listeners who are familiar with the study, which was only published a couple of weeks ago, basically I had to do a 360 or a 180 on that one because a lot of the things that I thought were going to happen just didn't happen. So to summarize the findings, before I summarize the findings, I'll summarize the study design. So we recruited just over 60 weight-trained athletes, males and females. Over 90% of them were actually involved in competitive sports, whether that was competing in I say sports loosely, competing in sort of bodybuilding, physique competitions, or boxing, rugby, rowing, things like that. So it was, while they only had to do at least or sort of more than 2 weight training sessions per week for at least the previous 6 months, they were relatively experienced and well-trained athletic cohort, because they most of them, 9 out of 10, were competing in some form or another. Now, we randomized the study cohort into 2 groups. We had a continuous dieting group who did 12 weeks of a moderate calorie deficit continuously, or we had an intermittent diet group who did 12 weeks of dieting as well with a moderate calorie deficit. But after every 3 weeks of that dieting, we gave them a 1-week diet break where we took their calories up to their new predicted maintenance solely via an increase in carbohydrate intake, before taking them back down to their moderate calorie deficit for the subsequent 3-week dieting period. So, of course, this meant that the intermittent group had a slightly longer intervention period when you tack on the diet breaks in there as well. Now, both groups, their caloric prescription was designed to cause approximately 0.7% body weight losses per week during the dieting periods, which is in line with recommendations for rates of weight loss in athletes. And this worked out when we actually sort of mapped out the data. On average, both groups were losing around 400 grams of body weight per week. Now, we also saw that during the diet break weeks, which was a good sign because it shows that the diet break prescription, number one, was adhered to, and our caloric prescription for it was pretty accurate as well. The average weight change was less than 100 grams. It was around 89 grams. So that shows that we're pretty damn close to maintenance. Now, what did we see with the study when we compared these 2 dietary protocols? Well, what we saw is that after both groups had done their 12 weeks of dieting, they lost basically the same amount of weight. They lost the same amount of fat. They lost the same amount of fat-free mass. Their metabolic rate dropped the same. So sort of all these things that I expected to favor the intermittent dieting or diet break group basically got sort of flipped on their head, to say it softly. Now, this was not to say that we didn't see any benefits with the diet breaks, because we absolutely did. It just wasn't the benefits I expected. So what we did see, we saw that 8 people dropped out of the continuous dieting group, whereas only 4 people dropped out of the diet break group. So that potentially might give us a hint that, okay, maybe one of the protocols is a little bit harder to follow for a given amount of weight and fat loss. Secondly, we saw that when we compared the caloric intake in the dietary logs, so think of it like a MyFitnessPal log, when we compared the actual numbers that were logged by the participants versus what they were actually supposed to eat, i.e. their targets, the diet break group was around 88% adherent to their targets, whereas the continuous dieting group was around 69% adherence, which again suggests that, okay, maybe one of these protocols is a little bit harder to follow or maintain in the long term, because the guys that were doing the diet breaks during their dieting weeks, they were just much closer to their caloric targets as the weeks went by. So this is starting to sort of paint a little bit of a picture here. Now, we might ask the question, okay, well, why are more people dropping out of the continuous group? Why are less people sticking to their targets in the continuous group? Now, what I think is the case, and we have the data to support this, if you read the study, we saw notably, and when you look at the graphs, this is really quite significant difference here. we saw notably lower hunger and notably higher satisfaction in the group that was having the diet breaks. And this was quite consistent over the entire intervention. So what I think could potentially be happening is that the diet breaks are allowing for easier appetite management. So you just don't feel so damn hungry. Whereas the poor guys in the continuous dieting group, I think hunger just sort of started really creeping up and became a little bit more difficult to deal with. When you're fucking hungry all the time, that's when the protocol becomes really sort of the enjoyment starts to wade quite quickly. And then you start questioning, why am I doing this diet? Why am I in this jackass's study? Maybe I should drop out. And that was probably the case, like in a few of the dropouts. So what I think, was actually happening is that we had this one group that was just found it a little easier to maintain the caloric prescriptions and the weight loss guidelines because the hunger just wasn't so savage and their satisfaction was a little bit higher. Now, I actually I didn't make this connection until I sort of started trying to think about the other research in the realm. But if I take you guys back to the Matador trial, which for those who don't know was a diet break study as well, but they gave 2-week diet breaks after every 2 weeks of dieting. We saw that the group using the diet breaks actually had significantly better fat loss and weight loss compared to the group that just continuously dieted the whole time. Now, originally we thought, okay, well, maybe this is because the diet breaks are enhancing fat loss efficiency or upregulating metabolism and things like that. But what happens, and this is particularly important because we've got to remember that this was an overweight cohort, people that are typically not fantastic with caloric adherence to begin with, otherwise they wouldn't be overweight. Now, what happens if the group having the diet breaks, maybe they were just able to stick to their caloric prescription a little better because their hunger just wasn't so bad compared to the continuous group who wasn't having the diet breaks. Maybe the hunger just got to that red line threshold where like, fuck it, okay, I'm gonna have some snacks. You know what I mean? Maybe that was actually more indicative of why we saw the better fat loss in the group having the diet breaks as opposed to this like metabolic advantage that we originally speculated. So to sort of summarize what I think were the main take homes from the ICECAP trial. Number one, I think that the appetite management is probably, I'm not going to say it is a home run, but I'm pretty confident based on sort of some of the things that we looked into with Matador and sort of the lack of explanation from the better metabolic retention that was seen in the intermittent diet group compared to the magnitude of fat loss that was actually better in the diet break group. I'll say that another way because that was crap. So what we saw was that the intermittent dieting group, who was having the diet breaks in Matador, they preserved their metabolic rate by around, on average, 100 calories more than the continuous dieting group. That was just nowhere near enough to explain the better fat loss that we saw. Like they were losing kilos and kilos more fat loss than the continuous dieting group. 100 calories of metabolic preservation is not going to do that. There has to be something else at play. And what I think is at play is this higher hunger in the continuous group that's threatening adherence and causing more oopsie moments. So what I do think at this stage, as we talk here and now, I think that we can reasonably confidently say that diet breaks will allow for easier hunger management for a given amount of weight and fat loss, i.e. you can get a certain amount of fat off without experiencing as much hunger. And then this has a flow-on effect to adherence and enjoyment. So you're not feeling so damn hungry all the time. So it's just a little bit easier to stick to that 25% caloric deficit. And because you're not feeling so hungry all the time, you're not having to go through that negative psychological sensations 24/7, which you and I will know, Steve, that you do experience in prep and things like that. To be able to turn that negative sensation off for a little bit, or at least dim down the switch, that would be a massive win. So I think they're the main benefits that are coming from diet breaks at this stage. Whereas if you asked me 2 years ago, I would have said, okay, I think it's these physiological advantages that are really the stock behind refeeds and diet breaks. But it just doesn't seem that diet breaks really do have this profound retention on fat-free mass and metabolism and things like that. It just doesn't really seem like it happens, and especially when we compare that to the Bill Campbell refeed study, where we didn't actually see any significantly better preservation of metabolic rate in the refeed group, and we didn't actually see any significantly better preservation of at least fat-free mass in the refeed group. This whole picture is sort of, when we pull the pieces together, it's just starting to look like the physiological benefits of refeeds and diet breaks have probably been overhyped for a long, long time. And it's more likely the hunger management benefits that allowing easier adherence and overall protocol enjoyment that are the real sort of key drivers of their success.
Awesome. Amazing summary. And I have to just actually make people aware how much, to give you huge credit for the study. I looked at the setup in terms of kind of, you had the 4 weeks of maintenance beforehand, kind of self-reported food intake, but kind of weighing in each week, reporting to a researcher each week. And I was just like, this looks like, and 3 weeks dieting, 1 week diet break. It's this looks like a evidence-based online coaches setup here. And all the nutrition was obviously following guidelines,
clients.
everything.
What 60 did you say, free clients. I had 60 free clients checking in each week.
No, exactly. So no, I mean, very well done. One question I did have, though, I don't know if I got this wrong, but looking at kind of levels of body fat, I think it was measured via DEXA, and people were starting out at around 20% for the men and 30% for the women. Is that right? Or have I got that wrong?
No,
How lean were they?
That sounds pretty correct. Yeah. So they weren't super lean, but not super fat either.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Do you think, out of interest, do you think that would influence things? Do you think that would influence the results?
I think that's probably the next step in this little research realm. That's probably the next sort of bit that we need to pull back the curtain a little bit, because I've said this on podcasts before. At least from a theoretical rationale, it does make sense that the leaner you are, the more potential sort of that refeeds and diet breaks could have on at least sort of lean mass preservation. I'm not comfortable saying metabolic preservation, but I am comfortable to say lean mass preservation. And I'll tell you why. So when we look at the data on sort of overweight individuals who are losing weight, often we never see any changes in fat-free mass. Sometimes it even goes up. It just doesn't happen, because the amount of body fat that they have just has a very protective effect over fat-free mass. But the less sort of fat that you have, that's when you lose that protective effect. And the leaner you are, that's when you become more and more at risk of sort of being susceptible to lean mass losses. So if we keep that in mind, it does make sense that, okay, perhaps if we had a cohort starting at 10% body fat in the males who are already reasonably decently lean, but they're going for that last 6 weeks into a show, would there be different outcomes on sort of lean mass preservation if we sprinkled in some diet breaks for those guys versus just dieting for them hard for the home stretch? What do I think? I don't know. Maybe. This game is all guesswork now, because 2 years ago I was willing to put all my chips in the diet breaks are the physiological holy grail, but I had to take those chips back real quick. So yeah, I don't know. It's maybe, but I definitely think that would be the next cool research question to ask is do things change when we've got these really, really lean guys? And I would say maybe. I think the difference could be with what sort of things are going on with the lean mass. I don't think I don't think the metabolic advantages are going to be there. I don't think a 2-day, a 3-day, or even a 7-day period of maintenance is just a potent enough of a stimulus to be able to normalize metabolic rate suppression notably. I just don't think it's the case. Like I've got some future studies that are coming out that show that if you measure immediately before and after the diet break, resting metabolic rate, that you do see a boost by day 7 of the diet break. And so people might be like, oh, cool, like metabolic boost. But basically immediately that the caloric deficit is reestablished, it's just like, bang, we're back. Like it's not like it stays elevated for a couple of weeks of dieting like we maybe thought. Like we thought we can boost it up and then ride out a bit of higher metabolism for a couple of weeks. Doesn't seem like it happens. So like, I don't think we can trick the body like that. I think as soon as that deficit stimulus is there, RMR comes right back down. So metabolic advantages of refeeds and diet breaks is something that I've stepped back on in a big way. I just don't think we have the data to support that, and I think we've actually got data support like sort of goes against it.
Yeah.
In terms of the hormonal hypotheses, that would be something I'd like to tap into a little bit more as well. Like I did run blood work in ICECAP because I wanted to show that by giving carbohydrate dominant diet breaks, that we were going to see an upsurge in leptin, and this was going to have all these magical effects on metabolism and things like that. And I actually did a freaking damn comprehensive hormonal profile. So I did leptin, I did ghrelin, so I did PYY, the hunger hormones, and satiety hormones. I did the anabolic hormones. I did testosterone, IGF-1. We did the metabolic hormones like T3, thyroid, to see what was sort of going on with these things. And the big one was that we saw no change in leptin between the groups. And on sort of when you really like think about it, it does make sense because you think, okay, leptin's being released from the adipose cells, the fat cells. When we're reducing body fat, i.e. during weight loss, we're going to be producing leptin. Like how much extra leptin are we really going to be able to produce when we've reduced our fat cell size?
Hey, Pascal here. I just wanted to take the moment to talk about our membership site. Inside, you'll find a thriving forum, an extensive exercise library, courses, presentations, and research reviews. All I need you to do is hit the link in the description below and sign up.
And we're just increasing carbohydrates for 7 days. Like, are we going to really be able to offset the effect that leptin levels are so much reduced from the result of the reduced adipose? It doesn't really seem too likely, and that was basically verified. So what we saw was that it doesn't really matter getting a bunch of carbohydrates for 7 days at maintenance. It just doesn't. It's not enough of a stimulus to really cause anything cool to happen with leptin. Now, something to say when you touched on what happens if we had a leaner cohort to work with. We know that with overweight people that are dieting or people with higher body fats, sometimes we actually see an increase in anabolic hormones like testosterone and IGF when body fat comes down. But on the flip side, when we're working with competitors, these things crash. You know what I mean? Now, in ICECAP, we had the medium body fat range dudes. We didn't see any changes, or I was expecting maybe some better retention of testosterone and IGF-1 in the diet break group. We didn't see it. But what happens if we had a 10% cohort of body fat and that group, their testosterone and IGF-1's crashing? Could they get more out of diet breaks? Could potentially those diet breaks allow them to sort of have a little bit of a normalization effect or an upsurge in those markers? And could that have an effect even on lean mass preservation and things like that? Maybe that we won't know until we do these studies in a really lean cohort. But again, the problem that we have is a lot of people that are listening to podcasts, just do the study, do that, go get 60, 10% body fat, athletes and run it. It's not that simple.
No.
It's not, that would be, if someone did that, I would stand up and I would salute them and say, give them a slow clap, because that sort of stuff is just so hard to do. Number one, finding 60 10% dudes that'd be willing to be local and go on your study is damn near impossible. And secondly, it's super, super freaking expensive. So, it would be hard to do. And my fear is that, yes, we may be able to like have a look at these leaner guys, but then the downside is it's probably going to be a much smaller sample size than what I had in ICECAP. And then people will make the criticisms, oh, well, it was only 12 people. Like, how much can we be confident? So it's sort of like a trade-off. Like, I probably could have been like, okay, we're only letting guys in that are under 15% BF, but that would probably put my cohort size in half.
Yeah.
And I'd be criticized like, well, how confident can we be in these numbers when there's only a cohort of 30? So it's sort of like a balance between sort of, I guess, like the reality of like how sort of like the practical side of things. Like, have we got like athletes that are really, really lean, like in the trenches, like those sort of guys, versus like how realistic is this actually to do on a grand scale? And those things aren't synonymous. It's sort of, if you choose one, you can't have both. They sort of like, they move in combination. So that's the tough thing about research is it would be great to have 60 freaking, I don't know, 8 weeks out Olympia competitors in your studies. But that's just not realistic, you know? And I feel like some people are probably a little bit harsh on researchers. It was just like, just get them, just do the study on those guys, like do the studies on the best guys in the world. And it's like far out, like it's so hard to do.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I know Brad Schoenfeld has similar frustrations because he's doing all this, that like hypertrophy research, and people have the same kind of criticisms to him. And I've spoken out with him, and people unfortunately just don't seem to understand. That's why, I think you deserve a load of credit for this study, because it was very applicable to a lot of people that a lot of the listeners will be working with. I mean, the majority of people I still work with aren't competitive bodybuilders. So this is still quite helpful for me as a coach, because now I have some answers, more so. And also I can think, well, maybe I can individualize my diet break approach depending on the person and what sort of person they're like. Do they like just getting the diet over with quicker, or do they struggle with adherence, that sort of thing? So, I mean, the study's awesome. And a question I did have though was, I don't know, this is more of a theoretical what are your thoughts on it? I think Eric Helms has talked about it, potentially Lyle McDonald, in terms of females and maintaining their menstrual cycle, like as they get leaner. And I think they've said that using refeeds and potentially diet breaks as well, they've managed to maintain that. I don't know if that's something you'd expect to see. I know we were talking about males and maintaining some of these hormones, and if they've seen that in females, maybe there's a sign there that maybe that there are some benefits.
Yeah. It's a good question. So in hindsight, I probably would have liked to maybe tap into the menstrual stuff, like considering that half our cohort were female. But because I dealt with all the weekly check-ins of all the participants, so that was the only way that I could control things and make sure everything was consistent along the way. And from my gist of things is probably the females weren't lean enough in my study to have to go through the amenorrhea or losing the cycle and things like that. So I can't stay too much from what I was seeing in my study. Again, it has decent theoretical rationale. I know that in our review paper, me and Eric talked about a few studies which showed that in dieted down females, I think it was 3-day and 5-day sort of overfeeding periods were able to trigger luteinizing hormone pulsatility and things like that, and things that are positively related with the menstrual cycle and basically bring it back on. But I probably can't say too much more than that. If I had to, if you're asking me what are my thoughts alone, I don't think that it's probably enough to if you're really, really lean, I don't think a diet break's going to save you. You know what I mean? Because I don't think losing the cycle is so much a sign of the deficit as it is a sign of being really damn lean, because it's sort of the incredible leanness that the female is experiencing, and the lack of energy reserves where the body says, okay, like we're basically starving here. What systems can we shut off in the body that are energy intensive that aren't required for our survival? And one of those systems is reproduction. And that's when those systems tend to go off. They tend to go off when you're really lean, not when you've just established a really a big deficit or something like that. So with that in mind, if you're really lean and you run a diet break, I'm not super convinced that it's going to sort of be enough to stop that from happening, because you're still lean at the end of the day, and the body's still going to know it. So that would be my guess at this stage.
Yeah, I guess it's I know I'm driving down the kind of for leaner individuals, and I'm thinking like competitors, but I guess for some people they're thinking, well, should I use a diet break when I am getting that lean, because now I'm extending the period of time to get leaner, and I have to diet for longer, and then also this isn't a comfortable position to be in. It's like below maybe a body fat settling range, and they start feeling really uncomfortable. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, see, my stance has changed a lot in the last 18 months. I was very much like pro diet breaks, and use them for most people. But now I'm sort of like, those weeks that were spent sort of just in neutral cruising, like diet breaks, where it's not really getting any closer to the goal, they could probably be better utilized, sort of making the weight loss phase shorter and putting into a phase or an improvement phase, or sort of getting back to positive energy balance sooner, as opposed, because like if it was a situation where these diet breaks were having all these physiological advantages like lean mass preservation, holding onto more of our metabolism and giving us a more optimal hormonal profile during dieting, then I'd say throw the diet breaks in. It's worth the cost. It's worth that extra time investment. But now I'm like, okay, so we're saying there's no physiological advantages, at least for people that are of moderate body fat level. There's no hormonal advantages. So the only advantages are a little bit less hunger, and potentially that flows onto better adherence. Is that worth doing 25% longer weight loss intervention? Maybe for some people, if hunger management is just a massive task for them, and that's the reason why they fail on their preps or something like that, then maybe that's a worthy trade-off. But for a lot of other people, like, I'd probably say just suck up a little bit of the extra hunger and do a 25% shorter weight loss period, and then reinvest that time where you can actually be sort of in a recovery diet and sort of improving, because there's not improvement going on in diet break weeks. But if you allocate them to like a recovery phase, you're at positive energy balance sooner. There's less feeling shit and suffering time. It just seems like that's probably not worth it in my mind.
No, I think it's very interesting. It's almost, you could think, oh, I don't know, if you're going to have the 12-week diet towards a stage, and rather than have like the break every kind of after every fourth week, you could save up all those weeks at the end to kind of reverse and build up. Like people talk about where you are going to probably see a realistic, better kind of establishment of all of these different things, and maybe bring a better package at the end. So that's very interesting. Something that I know we've spoken about it before, something I always I'm not sure I sit with it. It's something I struggle with, and I've spoken to quite a few different coaches about it, is during like deload weeks. So if you're cutting and you're going through a deload week, inevitably I think you probably agree, Jackson, you're going to need a deload at some stage due to accumulated fatigue from your training. But obviously then I guess it depends how you do your deload, but quite often they're kind of quite low volume, quite low load, and kind of recovery focus. So you're not necessarily generating much of a hypertrophic stimulus, especially when you're very lean. Is that like a period of time where you're risking now kind of loss of muscle tissue? Does it make sense to at least reduce the deficit during that week? Where does your mind shift when you think about that?
Yeah, so I'll give you my take. So if you are deloading, essentially your calorie deficit will reduce by definition as a result of less energy expenditure in the gym. So it's not going to reduce a whole lot, but reduce a bit. Now, do I think that deloads are a good time to run these diet breaks for like the lean mass preservation and things like that? Maybe, but I do have a new study coming out, and it'll be out this month. It's
Awesome.
been accepted. And what it showed was that when you actually run a diet break, so we're looking like we're not looking over a chronic phase, we're looking inside the diet break directly. We see that across the 7 days of the diet break at maintenance, carbohydrate dominant again, that you see a fairly significant improvement in muscular endurance. Not so much strength, but endurance. So what that tells me is that by definition, endurance is the ability for the muscle to do more work for longer before fatiguing. So you are at a heightened ability to do more work for longer during a diet break week. Would that then make sense to run that diet break during a week when you're doing less work in the gym? Maybe not. Maybe perhaps it would be smarter to run that diet break week the week before the deload, where you are actually potentially pushing yourself, and you could actually sort of you could draw those advantages from the ability to do extra, or the heightened endurance, the heightened performance that you'd be able to get during the diet break. I think that would potentially give more bang for your buck. I think if you ran the diet break during your deload, you're probably leaving those endurance and performance gains and benefits on the table.
Do you think, just to kind of, I guess, get asked this specific question, in the deload when training is so low, do you think you're risking kind of muscle loss if you're in a deficit during that week? Obviously it's less. Do you think there's really any much risk there? It's something I've been meaning to like dig into some studies. I don't even know if there is anything that really looks into it. But
like I used to think so.
Yeah.
And then when I actually hadn't dug into it. And the only time I dug into it was when COVID hit, and no one could go and no one could go to the gym. And I was asking myself these hard truths, like, how much muscle am I going to lose right now? And I didn't know. So I started researching it, and I was actually extremely surprised to know that you could take your volume, your initial training volumes, down to a ninth of your previous volume and still not lose muscle mass. Now, most people reduce their training volumes during deload 30 to 50%, somewhere in that vicinity. So you're still far from that 1/9 of volume change. So yes, you are going to be more at risk than sort of the study that I'm quoting, because those guys were in a deficit. But I still think that we're not for only 7 days time, and we're still in the gym and still lifting decently. I just don't think that muscle loss is going to be a massive risk during that time. I think you're going to be, and there's a few ways to do deloads, but I think you're going to be at even less risk of muscle loss if you reduce your training volumes but maintain your training intensity. So let's say that if you would do like 4 sets on bench with a given load and reps, you halve the volume, but you do two hard working sets. You know what I mean? So the volume's reduced. Those 2 sets are still hard. You're just doing 2 instead of 4. So the intensity is still maintained. I think muscle loss is going to be a low risk at that stage.
Yeah. That's what I was shifting my perspective on. I was like, if I am now thinking diet breaks aren't having these strong physiological promising effects, then like my rationale on taking them during a deload is less strong. And then my rationale for taking them in a deload again was muscle mass preservation. But if I was like, well, maybe I can deload a bit differently. And like you said, you can really slash your volume if you maintain intensity for a short period of time. I would have thought you can maintain quite a lot of muscle mass. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think especially as a bodybuilding competitor, it's hard enough convince yourself to deload, let alone then like not be losing fat that week, maybe by taking a break. And like you said, you're extending then the time of the prep and that might not be favorable if you are very lean, because that's just not a great place physiologically to be. So I think that, not that that's like, obviously I'm drawing a lot from a study that wasn't looking at that, but it's certainly interesting to think about these things. And again, it's an area of research that is never going to get a lot of attention because it probably doesn't really deserve it, to be honest. But like, resources are better spent elsewhere. But it's nice that like your study here can at least lead to some kind of picking apart theoretical underpinnings to other kind of programming methods.
I will just expand on that new study as well. Otherwise, you say next week you can ask me to come back on podcast. So while we did see the improvements in endurance during the diet break, so we didn't see improvements in strength, but we saw improvements in endurance. We also saw notable increases in alertness and significant decreases in irritability. So that probably again factors into, like, if you are using diet breaks, when should you use them? If you want, but we know that alertness is coming up and irritability is going down. Could that extra alertness potentially help the gym performance in like a final week before the deload or something like that, where maybe that little extra focus, putting the hunger. I think the alertness is coming from a temporary suppression of hunger, where people can just sort of more focus on what's actually happening in their life as opposed to thinking about the food. I think and that's probably why irritability has come down as well. It's probably because hunger went down during the diet break, but that's still helpful stuff, because it said, okay, well, on a really hard training week, if you are going to do diet breaks, maybe that's an okay time to have them, because you're going to be more mentally switched on and you're going to actually be able to focus on the training at hand, instead of going in the gym thinking, oh, I've got a hard session here. Like, I need to get it done so I can have my post-workout meal as soon as possible. You know, there's a difference in the way that you're thinking about the session. Whereas if it is during the diet break, maybe the mindset is like, I got this extra food in me, let's put it to use, and like, let's really crank hard in this last week before the deload kicks in. I don't know.
No, I definitely think that's really interesting. And actually, one point, I know you mentioned Menno's article. I did read over it, and he mentioned about kind of the continuous dieting group had the 3 weeks at the end where they're at maintenance, and you measured, I think, at 12 and then 15 weeks, because obviously the 3 on 1 off had the 15 weeks to get the 12 weeks of dieting. And he kind of mentioned that he looked at that and kind of theorized that, those 3 weeks of maintenance didn't even see like things leveling up in terms of the different hormones and things. I don't know if that's something you took home from the study as well. Like even 3 weeks after a diet doesn't seem to have done a lot to these various hormone markers and things.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like you just can't beat the system. It's like, you know when people, like, the same thing was said about like intermittent fasting or like any sort of like caloric arrangements within 24 hours. Yeah. Every single time they've been trumped by like what's being consumed in that 24 hours. Doesn't matter what you fucking do inside it, and the way you mix it up and switch it around, whatever in that 24 hours matters. And then it's sort of like, we can expand that further to like a week of dieting and like a weekly caloric deficit or surplus. And like, you can do all the caloric cycling and all the changes and high days and low days. But at the end of the day, it doesn't fucking matter. It's the caloric consumption over 7 days that really explain things. And it's almost exactly the same thing. If we just take it a little bit longer to like a 12 or a 15 week dieting phase, we got all these like changes going on in and out, but it's like, we just can't beat the system. It's like that cumulative energy intake and energy deficit over the entire period of the intervention that actually matters. And you can lower it and you can upper it and you can turn it off and turn it on. But at the end of the day, like you sort of end up at a similar endpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of interesting to me because I have, like, you diet maybe you do diet someone for 12 weeks and you're like, okay, that's a pretty decent chunk of time. You've maybe lost close to 10% of your total body weight. I want to now have a break. And it's like, how long do you need that break to be so they're actually in a better position to diet again, apart from probably way less hunger, I imagine, all those kind of factors that have improved. Maybe they did hear better at the start, but they're not in a hormonally like better position after 3 weeks.
Yeah, like,
maybe.
I don't think that's going to happen unless there's weight gain happening.
Right.
That's my take on it now. Like I think you can diet someone down And I reckon if you gave them 5 to 6 weeks at maintenance, we're still not going to see much going on with the hormonal stuff and the metabolic stuff. But like, that's a massive flip into what I thought 18 months ago. I thought turn that positive energy, turn the energy deficit stimulus off and some good things are going to start happening. But now I'm like, okay, you can turn the deficit stimulus off, but unless there's sort of a surplus switch on, those good things still aren't happening. So I don't think we're going to see, like, I think it could be any amount of weeks at maintenance post diet down. If there's not weight regain happening, I don't think we're going to see many good things happen, which is sad. It's annoying. Yeah. Like that sort of like bums us out. But because you would know how many clients ask you, like they finish their weight loss phase and then they're like, okay, Steve, like I want to maintain this condition, but I want to increase my metabolic capacity. It's like, okay, like I don't think you can do one without the other, you know?
Yeah. No, it's on one hand, a lot of the theoretical things that we had and thought maybe were occurring, maybe aren't, but now at least we have closer answers. So at least for dieters, when you are dieting, it does very much look like for a lot of people, at least people who maybe don't have adherence issues and their hunger management is good. They, especially experienced dieters, if a lot of the listeners are competitors or they coach competitors or very serious about this. So hopefully a lot of them have like good relationships with food and things. Like a big take home I would have thought for a lot of us is like, do your diet and get your diet over with kind of ASAP rather than like messing around with these things.
Yep, I think so.
Hi guys, Steve here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we pride ourselves on providing personalized service that will take your physique and knowledge to the next level. If you're interested, check the description and sign up. And in terms of, I guess that would be your overwhelming take home would be if you are that individual, like it's psychology independent kind of for these diet breaks for the most part at the moment. If you are that person who you have no kind of date in mind, you don't have like any reason to rush the diet process, maybe more of a general pop person who hasn't got a lot of experience dieting, the diet breaks are probably going to be generally beneficial for that person. But for the more experienced dieter, someone who doesn't have adherence issues, and even someone who has a deadline, maybe removing the diet breaks is the way to go for that person. And you don't need to be black and white, I guess. You can kind of use a bit of both.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think generally speaking, for the more hardcore, serious athletes, like competitors, they're probably going to do better just doing a continuous dieting phase. And I say serious, like competitors, because they're usually okay with enduring some suck for the end goal. Like they just understand that that's part and parcel of the process. Like it's going to hurt a little bit and that's fine. We accept that. I think those guys are going to do better just with the continuous dieting approach where you say, let's get the weight off in a reasonable amount of possible and let's not extend it any longer than it has to be. And then potentially reallocate those weeks that could be spent on diet breaks as refeeding into the show or something like that, like get them ready early and then start eating up into the show. I think that would be a far better approach, as opposed to sort of making this good progress and then sort of kicking into neutral for a week, every now and again. But for the less, I don't like saying serious, but I will say it anyway, the less serious athlete or more sort of gen pop dieter where like they want some results, but they don't want to hurt too bad, you know? Like, I think that's when the diet breaks can help them a lot because they're the sort of person where like, they have pretty good adherence at the start of a weight loss phase. And then the hunger creeps up and then they sort of say, oh, fuck, I don't really like this. I'm not sure if this pain is worth whatever the end goal is or the objective. And that's when adherence becomes under threat and we see some falling off the wagon type deals. I think diet breaks could help those guys a lot. I think that, yes, it's going to require a little bit longer until the attainment of said goal, but it's going to allow them to keep hunger at bay, a little bit higher satisfaction on the diet, potentially a more positive psychological well-being. And this is going to flow on to sort of facilitating adherence a little bit better, and less sort of moments of them sort of ravaging the cupboard looking for the Tim Tams when hunger just gets like a little bit difficult to manage. So I definitely, it's going to be very individually context based, and that's something that's changed a lot for me. Like 18 months ago with my clients, like 80-90% will be having a diet break or a refeed in some form or another. And now like 30-40% might get them, like if they need them, you know what I mean? Like I've changed that a lot. It's not a blanket prescription anymore, like it was sort of 18 months ago. So that's, and I suspect for the good coaches who listen to this sort of stuff, that we'll see that sort of change sort of replicated, over the coming months. But another like consideration is like, if you've got a time sensitive goal, like I want to be as lean as I can in 10 weeks before my wedding, photo shoot, blah, blah, blah. Like don't spend 20-30% of that time in neutral, not going anywhere, having diet breaks for a little bit easier hunger and maybe better adherence. Just knuckle down, do the continuous stuff and get in the best shape in the quickest time possible. But for the people who don't have the hard end dates and it's sort of like an open-ended goal, that's when, maybe diet breaks is a card that you can play.
Awesome. No, I think it's having kind of kept an eye on your conversations and what you've been talking about. I used to have it very much like deload, diet break used to be just like a standard approach. And slowly I've been doing maybe 3 days at maintenance during like a deload week at the end before the next cycle. And like I've been slowly manipulating it. So this is definitely helpful in terms of like, it's just getting more efficient, effective results for your clients. So I hope people do listen to this. I hope this gets a really good reception because I think it should. And I guess the more attention it gets, the more power we have potentially to drive more research into the area as well. So I'm excited for that. And I guess we've got like 10 minutes here, and I know I wanted to talk to you a little bit, and maybe we'll do a whole podcast at some point on this, but you are not just a researcher and a coach, you also practice what you preach a lot, and you've been sharing a lot of kind of physique shots, and we spoke a little bit about kind of you're taking it to the next level a little bit with your own training and things. So I'd love to just hear kind of, and I think the audience would appreciate hearing kind of what your at least like short, medium, long-term kind of goals are personally.
Yeah. So, for some background, like the last 3 years, I've been in the lab a lot. And you basically are on call. You're at the discretion of your participants. If a participant calls you up and says, Jackson, I can't do 11, but I can do 2 p.m. for your session, you say, okay, because you just don't it's that hard to get participants. You just need to have an open book. You need to be able to work around them, because if I say, oh, no, I can't do that, can we do it next week? Like, you're screwed. You lose that participant. So I basically had to keep a fairly open calendar for the last 3 years. And as a result of that, my training and my dieting suffered. Like a lot of sometimes rushed workouts, planned workouts off the cuff, sometimes missed workouts if shit just went haywire at the lab. Like one time our freezer just turned off, our negative 80-degree freezer, and I had to transport all my blood samples with dry ice from one freezer to another freezer. And I got home at 11 p.m. Stuff like that happens when you're working in a lab all the time. So my training, my diet was okay. But I would say if I had to summarize it, there was a lot of spinning wheels happening, doing enough to maintain, but far from optimal. Because I'm not spending time in the lab at the moment, it's basically all the studies that I've collected over the 3 years are just getting sort of written up on my laptop, getting published in journals, and whatnot, and discussing them online. I do now have that flexibility to sort of put myself first a little bit, with my training and my nutrition. So, basically at the start of this year, I just made, the commitment that, I was going to go all in with seeing how far I could take my physique, because I just haven't really put my physique first in the last sort of 3 years. So that meant a few things. That meant, basically saying no to all future partying and alcohol events completely, complete abstinence, which is tough because you got to go in a dark hole for a little bit. Going completely meal plan based approach, And a lot of people in the evidence-based community were like, you fucking jackass. Like, don't you know flexible dieting is so great? Like, and so I'm very up and down with flexible dieting. It's like diet breaks. It's highly contextual dependent. And like, name me one athlete on the high elite pro circuit who's eating pop chips and shit like that in their diet and changing their diet day to day. It just doesn't happen. I'm quite confident the body thrives off consistent eating. I'm also very confident that sort of consistent eating delivers more consistent weigh-ins, less spikes across the week, more consistent visual appearance compared to if you're flexible dieting and you're changing your fiber intake and your sodium intake and things like that with different food sources day to day. Things become a lot more washed. And I know that working with clients, my results with meal plan, or at least sort of 90-10 meal plan with some room for flexibility every now and again, the results are far better with those guys compared to like the guys who go completely flexible and just hit 3 numbers in MyFitnessPal each day. Because like there's a whole host of benefits. Tracking weight becomes way easier, more predictable. Tracking visual changes, way more easier, way more predictable. Performance is far more consistent when you're eating the same foods pre-workout and things like that. Like for example, 50 grams of carbohydrates coming from rice pre-workout has a completely different performance effect than 50 grams of carbs coming from Quest bars. You know what I mean? But in MyFitnessPal, it's the same fucking number. So you can't expect like to be like. Yes, overall macro and caloric intake over a 24-hour period is going to explain 85, 90, 95% of the body composition results. But when you have been doing this shit for a long enough, like 85, 90, 95% is not getting the job done. It's not going to take you to the next level. So I've done enough to be able to do okay doing the sort of the bread and butter stuff, but now it's sort of like add the tasty sort of like treats and sprinkles on top. That was a horrible analogy. I went from like a savory meat to so I had like the ice cream there, but then I wanted to add the whipped cream and the sprinkles and cherries on top. So my diet is quite repetitive. I'll be the first to admit that, and I'm not scared to admit that either. Like, and I've already got some flack from people in the evidence-based community, like, "Oh, you're just a bro, like eating bro foods." And I was like, okay, like if you see it that way, but like, why are you hating on that? Like, this sort of food delivers consistent performance. I know how my body's going to feel. I know how my digestion is going to function. My scale, I pretty much know what I'm going to weigh the next day. I know how I'm going to look the next day. Whereas like I've done completely flexible dieting periods in the past, and it's like a fucking surprise every time you wake up, like what's going to happen, you know? So that is the diet side of things. Very, very locked in with that. So I haven't missed a beat with my diet since I started this phase, and that's something I can't say that's been the truth for the time before that. You know what I mean? And even like to the degree of like scaling back social meals in a massive way. So people will know if they followed me on Instagram the last few years, I'm a massive foodie. Love my like Asian cuisines and things like that. And they're a big part of my enjoyment, but, it's time to like put the goals first as opposed to like how much fun am I having right now. So I've had to scale those things back, in a big way. And yeah, it sucks, but like if you're not prepared to sacrifice some shit, how much do you truly care about getting better? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's a summary of my nutrition side of things. And then my training, like training had been like very off the cuff, for a long period of time. And it was sort of like get in, and get the job done in an hour or so, if I had the luxury to even get an hour. But there wasn't too much meticulous planning. There wasn't too much tracking of things, because I was sort of thought, well, what's the point in tracking something like down to sort of the exact poundage if I might miss 2 workouts because my lab schedule just gets out of whack, you know? So yeah, I've written myself a plan. I'm actually, we've touched on already, but incorporating the 3-7 method of training, which is basically a variation on, I guess, a rest pause protocol or like a myo reps protocol. and have been having great results with that. I'm not going to say that it's purely due to 3-7 because my diet has gone like haywire, like has been really locked down in a massive way as well. And I'm not drinking, I'm not partying, I'm sleeping and things like that, that I haven't been doing, for a long time. But yeah, overall, it's just stop being happy with 80% of doing okay. Like doing the 80%, it's like every percent now. Yeah. Like it's everything measured like down to the gram. There's no balance. It's not like, oh, but you got to have balance and have your burgers with your friends on your Friday night. Like balance is out the window at the moment. Like to optimize results, shit's not going to be in balance. You know, like you want like Kobe Bryant, like Michael Jordan, like they're not living balanced lifestyles. You know, they're very unbalanced.
Yeah.
So that's basically my mindset at this time. Results and progress have been superb. Like shocker, like do everything you can to get better, and you got better. Like, oh wow, who would have thought? Progress has been great so far. And certainly have like a fire lit inside to see how far I can take things and really actually sort of put progress at the forefront of things for something I haven't been able to do for a long time. That was probably way too long of a ramble, but
it was good. I think we probably could turn that into a whole episode because like a typical interviewer style is I got like 5 questions now, but maybe we'll have to do one of these another time. But as far as I'm concerned, it's like very inspiring to me to see it, and I'm excited to watch your progress because it's been exciting so far, just seeing like glimpses of your physique come through and everything. So I know what happens when you dial in everything, because there's like you said, I mean, like the Pareto rule kind of is there. It's a real thing. You can do very little to get a lot, but to get everything, there's a lot of shit you have to do, but it adds up, and it definitely adds up over time. So yeah, I'm very excited for that, and I think the listeners are going to be enjoying seeing that as well. I know you've been sharing a lot of good information for ages over on Instagram, so hopefully people are starting to jump on there. And if people want to learn more about kind of your research, your coaching, all of that stuff, where should they head, Jackson?
Yeah, so the best, firstly, I'll thank you for that, Steve. I'm very, very appreciative and grateful for that. The best place to get me is on Instagram at Jackson Peos. So research updates, educational posts, physique updates. I'm starting to post quotes and shit now because like the mindset has just completely switched this year. But that's all my stuff's going through Instagram. And then for like, if you like what you see on Instagram and you want to see a bit more, I have started up a YouTube channel as well. Still early days on that, but really enjoying that as a platform to sort of interact with people and get into sort of more deeper discussions than you could potentially have on Instagram. Because with Instagram, like, fuck, I reckon you've got 15 or 20 seconds, if that. And we've got a generation of people that are more fascinated with abs and asses than they are with education. So that is a detriment of Instagram at this stage. But with YouTube, what I'm loving is like we've got people and it would be the same to be said for podcasts, people coming to listen to this sort of stuff. We've got people that are coming to actually sit for a extended period of time to learn, listen, and make themselves better. And that's why I love it so much.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely can say the same, especially with reels and stuff coming out. It's a little bit challenging, but yeah. I mean,
don't hate on my reels, Steve.
You can take the people from IG to the YouTube. It's sort of, you got to play the game. So I feel you there. I'm trying the same thing on reels. It's a challenge for me as well. So guys, thank you so much for listening. Massive thank you to Jackson. I know this is going to go down really, 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 really well. I'll make sure all of those links to Jackson's IG and YouTube is linked below, so you can check those out, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Florm. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.